The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Brian Maxson over at Journix. I guess first of all, thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. What we're putting on here today is a little 10, maybe 15-minute webinar on doing approvals and then using some of our other compliance tools around Timesheet. We're going to go ahead and record the webinar, so if after the webinar is over, we'll send that email out to everybody with the copy of the recording so you can pass that along to some coworkers or sort of keep that for yourself if you have questions that come up in the future. In addition, right now everybody's in sort of a listen-only mode. If anybody does have any questions after the webinar, go ahead and feel free to contact me directly and I'll try to answer any questions that you have. From a time perspective, I see it's right at about 2 o'clock Central, which is the time that this is supposed to start. So I'm going to go ahead and get things started. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me afterwards and we can walk through some of those things one-on-one. All right, so again, today's webinar is around time approvals and some of our other compliance tools. From an agenda standpoint, the things I was planning on walking through is approving and rejecting timesheets, approving or rejecting project-based approvals, creating or modifying approval plans, including email notifications, and then I wanted to take a look at some of our timesheet compliance tools, including a timesheet compliance viewer and the timesheet compliance report. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and go into the application. I'm going to log in as an administrator first. And that's going to take us into, the sitemap that anybody on the call that's an administrator would sort of be used to. I'm looking at version 9 of the application, so if some things look a little bit different for some of those, it might be an older version of the application. You can follow up with me later about potentially upgrading. But in the approval section, it has its own tab. In the older versions, that would be a collapsible toolbar down the left-hand side. But in the approvals tab, I've got both time approvals and project approvals. I also have expense and mileage, which work the same as the time does. So you can see I've got one timesheet waiting my approval. I would click that one timesheet waiting my approval. And this is the one timesheet that I've got submitted still. It's waiting for somebody to approve. Now this screen gives us some very basic information, the employee's name, the time period, and the total number of hours that need to be approved. I could approve or reject the timesheet from this screen, or I could click on this period link and that will pop up a second window that basically is like a snapshot of the timesheet, and I can approve or reject it from this screen. If I was going to reject the timesheet, I can put a reason for rejection in this white box below, and that reason for rejection would appear both on top of the employee's timesheet, right, like this green section does here, and there's also an optional rejection email notification you could send back to them that would also contain that message. One other note on timesheet-based approvals is that you can force. There's a setting in Journix that can force managers or administrators to have to click through the link to be able to approve timesheets. And this prevents people from going in and just doing sort of a check all and approve and not really reviewing the time. As I mentioned, the expense approvals and mileage approvals work exactly the same way as the time approvals. But something else worth noting is we also have a different concept of what we call a project-based approval. And you can see it just has its own option here called project approvals. And what this is actually doing is it's breaking out any time that people work on specific projects, and it's sending it through to a specific person that's in charge of approving time for just that specific project. Now, I'm logged in as an administrator now, and by default an administrator is a super approver, which is why I'm seeing time for both Project 1 and Project 2. But if I was filling out a timesheet and there was a different project manager for Project 1 and a different project manager for Project 2, when I submit my sheet, my entire timesheet might go to my manager for them to approve all of the time, like a timesheet-based approval process that we just reviewed. But maybe only the time I worked on Project 1 would go to the Project 1 project manager for approval. And so we can use those in combination with each other, one or the other. That's completely up to you. But the actual approval of that time works very similar. I can just check mark that and click the Approve button, and that's pretty much all there is to approving time in the system. So that's how you actually approve time in the system. The next thing I want to take a look at is the sort of creation or modification of an approval process. The timesheet expense and mileage processes are in this management, approval plans, and then I can manage or create time, manage or create expenses, manage or create mileage plans. I'm going to go ahead and create a new time approval plan. And the first thing you have to do is provide it with a name. And what I might suggest, especially in organizations that have some turnover or some changes, is that you name the approval process based on the name of the manager who is the primary approver that will be approving timesheets. That way, if down the road you need to move that from one manager to another, they're broken out by manager name, a little bit easier to find. In this world, I'll go ahead and just call this time approval process. And you can see we've got multiple levels here. You can actually have up to 5 levels of approval. And by level, what I mean is that if one person approves it, it can move up the chain to another person to approve, up to another person to approve, up to 5 levels. Most people are maybe at 1 or 2 levels max, but you can go up to 5. Anybody who has a manager authority or higher has the ability to approve timesheets, and so you'll see those people listed out here in this approver full name section. So if I picked project manager as the approver for this particular approval plan, within each level I also have the ability to set a backup approver. And what that means is if, let's say, project manager was out on vacation, you could have their backup approver come in and approve that timesheet on their behalf. And then I can hit the Save button, and that basically creates the approval plan. Now, from this particular screen, I could also assign that to users, and I'll just hit the search button, and it would pull up all the systems that people that I have in my demo world. But this is how I could say if I wanted to select these 2 people and assign it to the time approval process plan that I just created, I would pick that and hit the Assign button. You can also assign people to approval plans through their user profile. So if I was to go look at Manage Users and modify Aaron, then the approval plan is also something I can set from here. Now, when you're creating and managing approval plans, we also have email notifications that are available for you to use, and they can be different plan by plan. So this time I'm going to go back in and I'm going to manage time approval plans, and I'm going to go ahead and modify the one I just created. Setting up emails can be a little hard to find. You can see down here at the bottom there is the approval email configuration for plan time approval process. What you have to do is click this little yellow arrow, and it will expand that down, and you're able to see the different approval processes, email notifications that you can use. And you can turn these on or off. You can actually change the title and the body of these emails. But for example, you can do anything from notifying the user when their timesheet's been approved, notify the manager if something's been submitted or resubmitted. You can let people know if they're late turning in their timesheets, remind people to turn their timesheets in advance. And those are all automated by the system. So there's a nice sort of manual processing that you have to do to kick that off. Once you get this configured, the only thing that you have to do is to go into Configuration, System Settings, and Approvals and Auditing, and click this Activate Approval Emails and Send Daily at whatever time. Now, the email notifications that are tied to your approval plans are going to be built around the length of your period of approval. So for example, If you wanted, if you had a weekly timesheet and you asked it to send a reminder 2 days before the end of the period, then the user would get an email on Thursday. If you asked them to get an email 1 day after, if they're late, then they would get that email on Sunday if you had a Sunday through Saturday time period. All right, so sort of in summary so far, we've talked about how to approve timesheets and project-based approvals. We've talked about setting up timesheet approvals, managing those, and creating email notifications. The other thing I wanted to point out to you is how to create project-based approval plans. So that's going to be actually in the management and projects section, and each project has its own potential approval plan. So for example, if I wanted to create a project-based approval plan for project 2, then I click that project to modify it. On the modification page, there's a link that says Modify Project Approval Settings. And then this screen looks just like the timesheet-based approval process, where I can actually pick who I want the primary approver and the backup approver and have multiple levels of approval. But this is for this specific project, project 2, as opposed to a timesheet-based approval plan that I'm assigning a bunch of people to. All right, so that basically is an overall view of how to approve timesheets, how to create approval plans, modify them, and email notification. The other two components that I want to show you guys are around what we call timesheet compliance. And by compliance, what we mean is that people are getting their timesheets turned in on time so that you can process, your billing, your cost accounting, your payroll, etc. So in this same approval section, we now have a compliance field. And the first of those things is an organization compliance view that I want to show to you. And basically what this is doing, and I'll expand this legend so you can see what these things mean. You basically have the ability to represent your organizational structure here. So for example, right now I've got administrator, manager 1 submits up to administrator, and within manager 1, if I click on this icon, it will present me with a list of all of the people that submit their timesheets to manager 1. The idea here is that we want everything to be into this green color, and once everything is green, then you'll know that everything's been submitted and approved, and it's in a state where you'll want to go ahead and do your billing or do your payroll. Well, one thing I like about this particular view, besides just giving you a visual concept of where everybody's timesheet stands, is out here in the people that submit timesheets to manager 1. For example, you can see Aaron and Stephanie, their timesheets have been approved. Brandon's timesheet has been submitted but not yet approved. And you can see Brian and Aaron still have their sheet in an open state, which means that they've maybe filled out some time but have yet to submit that. So you've got email notifications probably in place that are supposed to remind them, but from this particular screen, I can also click on this icon. And from here, I can send another email to the user. I can send an email to the user and their approver. I can view this in a timekeeping mode. Maybe they went on vacation and forgot to submit it. Or I can modify this user if there's somebody that's left the organization. And the good thing about this doing from this screen is I can do it all from here as opposed to running a report, see who's missing, and then having to go to different places of the application to take care of that. I can do all of this from one screen. So this is a pretty popular feature for especially people that are trying to do end-of-period processing of the time data. Again, billing clients, payroll, things like that. In addition to using these tools to email people, if I click this Run Approvals Email Now button, it will regenerate any email notification for any sheet that is not in a submitted and approved state. So late notifications, notifications to approvers, things like that. And technically, really, you could spam them. You can click this as many times as you want, and it'll continue to email them. So this is a pretty popular feature to help the workflow process of the timesheet workflow. And it gives you, again, a visual representation of everybody's status, but also gives you the ability to take action on those timesheets over here. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to show you guys is what we call a compliance report. And it used to be called the sheet status report. And basically we just moved that from the custom tools section over to this compliance section. And so we've got a user compliance report. And basically what this allows us to do is take that same information and put it into sort of a report type format. So I can search on certain date ranges. I can search for only late people, only people I approve, or everyone in the system. Again, depending on what your authority level is, that's going to dictate which people that you have the ability to run this report against. I'm going to go ahead and run this against everybody. I have the ability to include certain custom fields. So if I wanted to include the manager name, maybe what department somebody belonged to, I have the ability to do that. And then I can go ahead and preview this, and what it's going to do is it's going to tell me for this particular time period all of my employees and the status of each one of their timesheets. You can see, just like the compliance view, Aaron and Stephanie have been approved. Brandon has been submitted but not approved. Brian's been open, just not submitted, which means I've opened my timesheet and probably put some time in, while Manager 1 actually hasn't put any time into the system. You can also see the amount of hours that that person's put against their sheet. So again, this used to be called the Sheet Status Report. Now it's called the User Compliance Report, and it's in this approval section. So again, in review of that, we talked about how to approve timesheets from both a timesheet perspective and also a project-based approval. We talked about how to create and manage both of those types of approval processes. We talked about how to create email notifications and wrap that around the approval plan. And then we talked about the two compliance tools, which are the Compliance Viewer and the User Compliance Report. At this point, those are really the sort of the main portions that I wanted to talk to you guys about as far as approving and compliance tools go. If you guys do have any questions, for anybody that does not have my contact information, here's my email address and my telephone number. Feel free to submit any questions to me that you have about this, or feel free to contact me in general. You can also contact our support team. Sending an email to support@drinks.com will open a support case for you, or you can call into either our direct line or our 800 number and ask for support. Other than that, guys, I appreciate you guys taking the time for us this afternoon. Again, we will send you a recording of this webinar, and just keep an eye out for other emails from us. We'll continue to do these on at least a quarterly basis, in some cases a monthly basis, and we hope that you guys get some value and benefit from attending. Again, thanks again for your time, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.